Scott, it's really great to have you on the podcast, our second episode. I'm here with Marc, of course, as well, and I'm stoked to talk about this topic revolving around how folks are kind of shelling out thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, thinking they're building this incredible online digital storefront. So today, I think we're going to talk about why it happens, how to avoid creating this digital storefront that doesn't actually, bring in visitors, leads, revenue, and how to avoid it, and what actually matters when building a website, right? So I thought I'd start off real quick by just, asking you the big question: where do organizations go wrong when it comes to spending these precious dollars on their websites?
Yeah, okay. I'm really glad we're talking about this because here's the simple truth of it is for about the last decade, so for ten years now, I've been getting Yellow Pages vibes from the web. And what I mean by that is when I was new, like when I was young in my career, I spent a lot of time in boardrooms with clients, and this conversation would come up. The conversation would be around budget and what was being spent. And at some point, we'd come across the line item for Yellow Pages.
Hmm.
And there was this sharp divide, in the early 2000s where that budget started to look like maybe it shouldn't be as high as it was, or maybe even at all. And
Right.
it was really hard for those businesses to let go of it. And part of the reason is because every one of their competitors was in there, right?
Hmm.
And so the web was slowly eroding the relevance of Yellow Pages this entire time, and that was what kept on coming up in those conversations. And I get that feeling from websites today, ironically, when I'm sitting in a room now with clients and they're talking about what they're going to do with the web. A lot of times the motivation comes down to because we think we have to.
Yeah,
and
Hmm.
it's
and
a
there is a little bit of that at play, and I'm not saying that there's a total direct equivalence between the Yellow Pages and the web, but there are a few things that they have in common. And the very first one is the way that the use of the web has changed over the last 20 years, right? People, even right now, like people spend fewer hours online than they did in 22, but they still spend 6+ hours a day online.
Mhm.
Now,
Hmm.
the folks at Android or Google and Android, they track that time, and 92% of it is spent in apps. Social and video, by far the dominant ones. Only 8% of that lives in the web browser. So
Hmm.
the amount of time that people actually spend on the web is small, compared to this where they spend the rest of their time. And so that alone is a clue that you need to think hard about how you're spending money on the web. Now, if the web is like a really critical part of your business, like if you have a storefront, like you were talking about, Derek,
Yep.
then definitely, there's more to be spent there and you should, pay attention to it. But for a huge number of businesses, that is not what their website does. And so I think the the reasons people are spending money on the web are not always clear to them. And the question becomes, if you're not spending that budget on the web, where should you spend it? And I was hoping we could talk a bit about that today.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, a lot of businesses are just like they treat their website as just as a necessity, right? Everybody's doing it. Everybody needs a place to go, regardless. So yeah, let's talk about, what's the real opportunity they're missing here, outside of just their website.
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to those consumption metrics, right? So we right now, for the most part, for better or for worse, we look at the web and we think about people going to it. But most of the reason that we have websites, if they're a non-storefront website, isn't actually for people. It's for
Hmm.
machines, right? It's to optimize for search. And that arena is changing very, very quickly in 2025. And that's why I think now is as good a time as any to talk about, how to spend money on your website and what you should be spending it on. Because where the similarities between the web and the Yellow Pages end is in that consumption side of things. The Yellow Pages were exclusively consumed by humans, but
Hmm.
the web is, humans and bots, like search engine bots, and
Hmm.
then more modern bots. So the artificial intelligence, the agentic side of artificial intelligence, so like deep research from Google,
Mm-hmm.
is coming and parsing your website and doing stuff with it. And the generative stuff is too. If you put
Mm-hmm.
ChatGPT in search mode, it's grabbing content and delivering it. And it isn't just there either. There's also the way that your web is displayed in the search engine results on good old fashioned Google. They
Mm-hmm.
are repackaging your content today and delivering it to people in channels that where you don't have any control over how it looks on the other side of it. And
Yeah.
so I think a good portion of your website budget should be spent understanding how your content is really actually consumed, not just by
Mm-hmm.
people, but by machines as well.
Hmm.
It's an interesting point because there's a website, I mean, is in a lot of ways, you can make an analogy between that and a store, whether you have an e-commerce platform or not, because it's a place where people can go if they are going to find you, but, or where if they want to find out more about you, I should say. To your point about consumption, though, you've got a whole bunch of people that are not spending a ton of time on your website because they're spending most of the time in the social platforms or wherever, playing games, all that kind of stuff. So then there's this question around kind of like in a physical sense, if you have a store, a single location store, how do people find you?
Yeah.
And I think there's an interesting component there of, yeah, there's a website does matter, especially when people want to find out more about you, but they may not just happen on you. So there's a whole plan around getting yourself found that is no longer just about through SEO practices or even traditional advertising, because there's more and more of this zero click search and
Hmm.
share of algorithm kind of idea that is existing that are non-traditional ways for people to find you,
Hmm.
or
Yeah,
just
that's right.
direct search.
Yeah. So I like to think of this with a like an 11-point word in Scrabble, which is orchestration. I think, when
That's
you're
a good one.
thinking
I'm
about
gonna
your
A
I'm
lot
gonna
of
use that.
syllables. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of syllables in that baby. And so Mark, you're right. Like, the web is a necessity, but not for the reason a lot of people think. And I think I definitely had the benefit of being in my career when spending huge amounts of money on a web experience was worth it. When
Mm-hmm.
people would spend time, combing through this like amazing thing that you've created to show off your product or service.
Mm-hmm.
Like the amount of time spent in browser in that era was high, right? Because apps didn't exist yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, uh, um, craving for experience from a business still exists, but the way it's executed is different. And so orchestration comes into play in understanding how the web is the tipping point to go to a different experience, the one that people actually want. So shuttling them off to TikTok or shuttling them off to a chatbot or getting them, into maybe a downloaded, software demo or something like that. So there's lots of different reasons people end up on your website for sure, but it's seldom the website is the actual reason to be there.
Hmm.
And so I like to think about this in a couple of ways. The first is like, how do you seamlessly transfer people from one channel to the next? There's lots
Mm-hmm.
of different ways to do that. Most web browsing is mobile in 2025 by a long shot. So having people use their phone in context and then go and do something else with the phone, making sure that that works really well, making sure that your mobile web experience is really performant is like a table stakes thing that every business could benefit from. But I think the danger of abandoning your website. So, like if you took me really literally and said, "Fuck it, I'm not going to do any web stuff anymore at all,"
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the thing you lose is customer intelligence, and that wasn't a problem with Yellow Pages. You get a little bit of information out of Yellow Pages back then. They, how many people is it circulated to, and how
Mm-hmm.
often do they spend time on those pages, and what's the benefit of buying the glossy pages and all that kind of stuff. But it pales in comparison to the intelligence that websites provide about your customers. So I think one place to channel that money that you normally spend on experience, we might be over expending on web experience, is to ensure that you're not losing customer intelligence. So learning about what they like and where they're
Mm-hmm.
going and why they got there in the first place. But I think, sorry, go ahead,
It's
Mark.
yeah, it's just an interesting point because I want to like double click on that for a second because there is this also other trend of the cookieless society happening, um, which we've depended on from a marketing perspective for so long, since the dawn of digital, pretty much, where we had this idea that we could track everything and everyone and all those kinds of things. With that going away and ad blocking and privacy settings and being what they are, there's an interesting push there for more of this first party data, which, kind of to build on what you're saying, is kind of a new objective in a way for having a website. It's not just about telling people who you are, it's also learning about
Yeah.
who the people are that are there that you're trying to serve.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Mark. Yeah, and I think let's clear one thing up though about ad blockers. We've been in an environment where ad blockers have been installed on 60% of our customers' computers for a decade, right?
Mm-hmm.
So ad blockers aren't new news, and
No,
there are
no.
more of them than there are not. And so the fear around the cookieless future, I think, is really unfounded. Like, if there's one thing I know about marketing people, it is they will find a way to track you,
Yeah.
and they currently do. Like,
Yeah.
there are targeting options that are available in
Oh
2025
yeah.
in this like cookieless future that are astonishingly effective and good for consumers. They don't see stuff they don't want to see anymore, which is
Mm-hmm.
wonderful.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. The cookie thing, I think, is actually a good thing. If that
Yeah.
goes away, I think that it would actually be very good for marketing.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Apple's on the right side of the privacy conversation. So I'm the president of an ad agency, and so I like have to walk this kind of weird knife edge where I know what's good for consumers, and I know if businesses don't follow what's good for customers, then they lose those customers. So on one hand, I like reasonably understand the benefits of privacy and the like intense push towards privacy
Mm-hmm.
that organizations like Apple have spearheaded and Signal, the messaging app. On the other hand, I know that people get more irritated by ads they didn't want to see than the ones that they do. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
advertising is useful for people, and the tracking apparatus allows us to ensure that happens more often. So I think it's useful. But without your website, it's really tough to learn about customers because even though they don't spend a lot of time on it, it is often the first place they go to figure out where to go next.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the the way that the web is consumed right now is probably the thing we should be looking at the hardest when we're trying to spend your web dollars effectively. If you have
Mm-hmm.
tons and tons of people that are using WhatsApp to talk about you and your business, then you should definitely know how your website looks when it's linked in WhatsApp, and you should definitely know what their bot does to your content when somebody uses it to scrape a thing for a message in WhatsApp. That's as important now as monitoring the way that your search engine results pages looked 5 or 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's important. I think the other thing is that the web browser is like a small mature piece of software that exists in tons and tons and tons of devices. I have this like goofy frame, like one of those frames for pictures on my
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
desk here at work. Even it has a web browser, a very functional web browser in it. And I think this is you know the thing to remember is that the context of the device plays a lot into the web experience you should be delivering. VR
Mm-hmm.
helmets have a very good web browser in them, and they're capable
Mm-hmm.
of doing all sorts of fun stuff with AR and VR right in the helmet, right in the browser, using things like Apple's AR kit. And so, I'm not saying that the web is dead by any means, but what I definitely see is an an old point of view on how the web is consumed and what you should be doing with it when we sit down with businesses today.
I have another question, if you don't mind me jumping in again, Derek.
Yep.
Um, the There's this idea around when we're talking about collecting using research. Um, the website is researched and learn more about customers. Where my head went with that is around this idea of, well, we're going to control a customer journey, and then we're going to put up gated content along the way so we can get this bit of information, like as a lead gen kind of thing for B2B, or just in general B2C. You see some of that. It used to be a lot more common than it is now, but just wondering on your thought process around the customer journey idea and the experiences. and how it used to be, well, we got to get people to the website so that they can download these things so we can capture information, but and then we'll pepper them with like all kinds of sales
Yeah.
automation material and all that kind of
Right.
stuff.
Yeah.
What's your
Yeah.
thoughts on web in relation to that user
Yeah.
experience?
I think it's still prevalent. Contact forms and things like that are still, like a big part of websites in general.
Hmm.
But there are plenty of ad units outside of the web that allow you to capture information and gain contact with a customer,
Mhm.
like right in the ad. And people prefer that. Like the whole reason that we map customer journeys is so we can map where they drop off. And
Hmm.
so the fewer opportunities you give them to drop off, and the biggest one is making them jump between channels, the more likely you are to have success. So like there's, for a lot of businesses, it's a totally reasonable idea to just forego the web as a communications tool entirely and rely on the channels where people actually spend time and communicate. So messages, direct messaging and social apps, group chat, app focused applications like Slack or uh, I'm going to say Teams and probably get flamed for it, but I'm going to say Teams anyway. And so I think you have to evaluate what you were trying to accomplish with the web and then see if there's a channel that can perform it better for you, because the web does have one advantage is that it's very cheap to develop there. Like you can spend a lot of money on a website, but when it comes to just straight up getting a page up for people to see, find, and then contact you through, the web
Yeah.
is pretty cheap you know
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting methodology just because we've been doing it the same way for so long, right? Like you run a Google ad, it goes to a landing page.
yeah.
You run something
Hmm.
else and you have a billboard ad and it directs you to, hey, go to www dot so and so
Hmm.
for
Right.
more information and
Yeah.
whatnot. So that's really interesting that you're kind of talking about um, driving traffic to websites being more of an outdated
Yeah.
tactic in this era of like social and these online communities like your discords and whatnot, AI
Yeah.
search.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
how can you speak to, let's say, from an agency standpoint, how can you speak to clients about kind of this budget prioritization in terms of, you know, I'm sure there's clients out there who'd be like, why would I spend budget on like WhatsApp and Signal? Like,
Yeah.
why would I put my resources towards that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question, and so the great irony of it, of course, comes down to customer intelligence. Like, what do you know
Hmm.
about how your customers communicate with you and with each other? And if the web plays a big role in that, then yeah, like double down on the web. But I think you'll find that there are not many businesses where the web is the place that people want to communicate with you. Otherwise there'd be community managers that we still call webmasters. Those don't exist anymore. Social media community managers are their replacement because it was faster to tweet that an ATM was down than it was to go fill out a contact form on the web. So we've already passed that day. So to answer your question directly, Derek, the way that we have to talk about it on the agency side is from the customer's point of view. We have to talk about it from the customer's point of view, because and this is the experience I had, when I was really junior and I was, fighting the good fight to say goodbye to the yellow pages. In that time, the thing that we had to prove was that spending money on yellow pages was not getting you the same things that spending money on the web would. And now
Hmm.
we're in a situation where we have to show people, and it's much easier to do that in 2025 than it was in 2002, let me tell you, that spending money on other channels makes more sense than spending it on the web.
Hmm.
Internally here at the agency, a question we ask ourselves often is, what's the consequence of doing nothing, right? Like that's
Hmm.
the one of the hardest things to get
Yeah.
across when you're
Yeah.
pitching an idea is, if you don't do this, this is
Yeah.
what the consequence of it is.
Yeah.
Because we're positive people, right? And we're used to buying things in impression counts and measuring GRPs and doing all the stuff that, like, you spend $1 and you know exactly what you're going to get. So for us to go into a room and say, like, not doing a thing is going to lose you something is really hard to do, but it's worth it. It's worth
Mhm.
it because
Mm-hmm.
it gives us that contrast to the thing that they've always been doing,
Mm-hmm.
And so, like a lot of businesses spent a substantial portion of the money they could have spent on their website back in those days on the yellow pages. Yellow pages weren't cheap. I think we all
Mm-hmm.
forget this. Like, they knew what they had when they were in their heyday. And
Totally.
so, they didn't totally recognize that their heyday was ending. Like, I remember some pretty cheeky yellow page ads about how they were better at finding information than Google was,
Mm-hmm.
which looking back at that now is hysterical. But, but that's the way we have to do it. And it's hard work. It's,
Right.
it's really tough to do.
Yeah, if you don't know your alphabet, it's really hard to find your listing on the
Yeah,
yellow pages.
yeah,
Um,
that's right.
it's funny, right? Like I want to kind of go back to the a podcast episode that we did a while back, episode one. This is episode two, which is funny, but where Pedro in our last episode talked about identifying the right problems.
Oh, yeah.
So when it comes to, let's say we're trying to figure out what our goals, our objectives are, what our outcomes are going to be, it's always going to be we want to drive more traffic to a certain channel, right? But
Hmm.
how do you, so let's say we want to drive more traffic to WhatsApp, but then how do you gain revenue from WhatsApp? Like,
But
this
yeah,
is
just
this is
to
quite
build
new
on
to me.
that
Yeah.
too, for me to jump, because one of the things that popped in my head as you were saying that, Derek, was like we had this idea around paid earned owned, and the website is
Yeah.
something we owned. And then you
Right.
wouldn't send people to places you didn't own because like you're renting, and why would you send people there? But I'm super interested what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't think we send people anywhere. I think people
Yeah.
are in a
Hmm,
place and we have to meet them there. So,
good
the
point.
whole
Got
notion
goosebumps,
of,
goosebumps.
you know,
That's a Paul
yeah,
quote right
I
there.
I hope you got goosebumps not for the bad reason there, which is like, oh shit, we've been doing it wrong. But
Well,
um,
yeah.
but like
No, that was the
listen,
fear of panic. That
Yeah, I
wasn't
was
the
like,
goosebumps.
I gotta go.
that's so I mean, like, number one is like, marketers that think they create attention are on the wrong side of that argument. We chase attention, and
Mm,
attention is uh, largely small groups of interested people talking about the thing they're interested in online.
Hmm,
Sometimes
wow.
it's in a helmet, sometimes it's a lot of times it's on a phone. Occasionally it's in a web browser, but not very often. So I think, again, understanding the channels where your customers work,
Yeah.
like, when they're looking at you matters. So like Mark, you're an expert at B2B. Nobody knows that style of marketing better than you, in my opinion. And I think you'd agree with me on this, is that uh, the channels people use when they're communicating for work are like significantly different than the channels that they use when they're communicating for pleasure, for fun, or in their personal
Mm,
lives. And so the that alone is probably a hint that understanding those channels is important. So if you know that your product is being evaluated by a procurement department who's receiving their links in Teams, for God's sakes, check your links in Teams. All right.
hmm,
Like, it doesn't matter what it looks like anywhere else at that point. And I think the other thing to consider is what you were talking about earlier, Derek, which is the like, go visit us at www.something/something has been replaced by the QR code. And QR codes can take you to WhatsApp and Discord just as easily as they can take you to
hmm,
any other place, right? So the way in which we get people into the channel that they prefer to communicate with us, it's never been easier to do that. And it doesn't need to involve the web. It might need to involve some web services,
yeah.
which
hmm.
is good for web developers,
Yeah.
but probably not necessarily the web where you're going to be chatting.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm gonna ask you a very funny question. So how do you track like WhatsApp links? Like, where do you get this information from?
Well, that is also a great question. I mean, oh,
Sorry guys,
goodbye,
I
Mark.
got
It was
I got
great
to
to
go.
see you, pal.
Oh,
Yeah, good
see
to
you,
meet
Mark.
you. Thanks.
Thanks.
I think there's a couple of things to talk about there. First of all, the folks at Meta, they can tell you a lot about uh, like who uses their products and for what reason. And so that's the first place to start, is start with the
Mm,
people that own the channels where people are spending time, and see what information they have. Like Google's always been very transparent about how people use their services, what way and best to be in their services to reach them. They tell us make content for people and the search results will follow. They're always right about that. They tell us in YouTube that if you're demonstrating, it works better than if you're just explaining. And so there's always guidelines that the platforms have
Yeah.
that you can start with. The second place to go is, and again I say this with all recognition of the irony of it, is your web analytics. Your web
Yeah.
analytics can tell you the source of traffic sometimes,
Right.
depending where it's coming from. So that can give you a hint. It doesn't work that well. A lot
Yeah.
of traffic from messaging apps shows up as direct, and direct is just a big kind of catch-all bucket.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Yeah, because
Yeah,
you can add a UTM code to one of
sure.
these unorthodox quote unquote channels, but still it might show up as direct traffic in
Right.
analytics, right? So
Yeah.
there might be something along the lines of let's say it's a contact form,
Yeah,
put how did you find us as an open field or something, and
exactly.
literally just ask people, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or, and the third option, and it costs money, but not as much as it used to, is to do research. Like,
Yeah.
get a lookalike audience of your customer base,
Mm,
have a professional research company go and talk to them about how they communicate and what they say, and
that's true.
like learn a thing about them, and then follow that learning, which is again like what customer journeys were for in the first place and what we've been doing all along.
Right, that's true. Well, Mark had to leave, and that was kind of a good segue. One, if you have any good research companies that you would recommend, please let me know. I'll throw them in the show notes. And then two, let's talk about H2 Accelerator, some of the stuff that you folks are doing. Let's celebrate what you've got going on. What's going on with you guys, Scott?
Okay, well, look, first of all, Calgary is blessed with two extremely good research companies. One of them is Stone Olufsen. They are like a fixture in the local marketing scene here. I don't think any marketer in Calgary gets to work on an account without seeing at least one of their reports.
Yeah.
The other one is Cashew Research. I think they're doing really innovative stuff, and they helped us out with a client in Seattle, Clipper,
Mm,
recently to understand how we can reach people in that space. This is a really important uh, kind of understanding to have. I mean, this is a transportation company, and so when they don't do things correctly, it can go really really bad for them. Like this is also international travel.
right.
So understanding customers is really really important to them,
Yeah.
and luckily we were able to do that. So I guess that's sort of a good segue into what's going on with us.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let's hear
yeah,
it. Yeah. I think
yeah.
you worked with those guys, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so yes, that's right. Actually, I moderated a panel for the
Mm,
folks at Cashew when they launched their new product, which is self-serve research tool. It's really really cool. You should go and check it out.
yeah.
Um, at H2, things are interesting for us right now. Uh, we're recently in the press for moving to Calgary. The secret, of course, is you know no secret at all, but we've been here for pushing a year now, and we've started to solidify who our team is here, and we have clients in this market in Alberta that we're serving now. Heritage Park being one of them, the other
Mm,
one being NMAX and EasyMax for NMAX,
mm,
and so we have a lot of work going on for them right now. I mean, obviously, it's heavy planning season for Heritage Park as we get ready for their big opening and gate sales. For the folks at EasyMax, they have always the hardest communication job in the world, which is helping people understand how energy gets priced and sold to them.
yeah.
And so clarity is a thing that we're always on the hunt for there. We get that by understanding customers and being able to, yeah, talk to them, about what they're doing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean things are really good for us here. And then the other part of it is H2 is part of the TCAN network, which is a network of
Yeah.
agencies throughout the country. And this year we're hosting the TCAN conference, and so it'll be
Wow.
in Victoria where our head office is, and it's in June. And so we're super excited. We just started putting that together in the last couple of months here, and Dan, our CEO, has been out trying to wrangle sponsorships, and we've been thinking about which speakers we're going to get to that. And So that's been a ton of fun for us.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing some of this awesome insight. You've got me thinking about what I'm currently doing with some of my clients, and I'm a little nervous about some of the strategy decks that I currently have and some of the proposals I have. But yeah, Scott, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, and we'll chat with you soon.
Derek, thanks so much for having us. We're glad to be here.
Yeah.